Uju, Marcus Winchester, Indigenous, Bodai Wadmi, Mina Odawa and Dao, Jigwe and Dodem, Cowater, Michigan, and Dochbia, Mina Bawa Tik, and Dada Oropi. So I just said, hello, my name is Marcus Winchester. I'm Potawatomi and Odawa. Those are the nations I belong to. And then the next thing I told you is that I'm ThunderClan. So my duties and my responsibilities to my people are that of the ThunderClan. Our governance structure is organized through a clan system. And so that's what I mean by my duties, my responsibilities of my people are that of the ThunderClan. And then after that, I said I'm from Coldwater, Michigan. That's where I was raised. And I now currently live at the place of the Rapids. And when I say that, I'm referring to Niles, Michigan. I just did my introduction in Potawatomi. Potawatomi is the anglicized version. The real way to say it is Bodai Wadmi. So the way to say Potawatomi language is Bodai Wadmi Mwen. And it's just the way that Potawatomi people speak. The word for sturgeon is nameh, and the word for river is zb or ziba, depending on dialect. So nameh, ziba would be Sturgeon River. Sturgeons were a food source for us, obviously, and sturgeons were also a clan within our governing structure. And from what I understand, that was a really important clan, and they often took roles as leaders, and there were a lot of prominent Potawatomi people that made it into the history books that were Sturgeon Clan. A lot of those fish clans, Sturgeon Clan, Catfish Clan, Turtle Clan, those guys hang on to our knowledge. As far as the River Raisin goes, I know that we had a lot of Potawatomi villages along this river, and of particular importance, towards the northern part of the river, there was a portage that we would use to connect ourselves to the other important rivers in the state, like Grand River, Kalamazoo River, and we had a lot of communities on the western part of the state as well, and so that's how we kept those connected. The original Potawatomi territory was all of southern Michigan, all of northern Indiana, a northern sliver of Ohio, northern Illinois, and southern Wisconsin going on up into Green Bay, the Door Peninsula. Our nation was able to have that large, huge tract of land that we took care of because of the fur trade. From what I understand, we were being on this part of the southern Great Lakes, a lot of travel, a lot of commute had to go through Potawatomi communities. A lot of those early European settlers had to go through here. So we were the main people doing that with the French and participating in that trade. And so because of that, our presence in the area really expanded. So from what I understand, from what I've been taught, I would say that big, huge expansion of land that I just mentioned around the southern Great Lakes, became prominent after the fur trade. There's a historian, his name is Richard White, and he put out a book called The Middle Ground. I really like that book, and I refer to that book a lot because his main hypothesis that he talks about is about how the Native Americans of the Northwest, the several tribes, Potawatomi obviously being one of them, the relationship that was created with the French and eventually the British was intermingling, and there was a lot of give and take from both sides. And that narrative is important because it's in contrast to the normal narrative that you hear about Native Americans and the early European settlers. And that narrative is usually the Europeans got here and they took all the land, and also sad for all these naked savages running through the woods. But what in reality happened was, our nations, we were strong nations. We had our governing structure, we had a police structure, we had everything that you can think of that a healthy, vibrant nation would have in place. We had all of that. And so when these European powers came here, it wasn't just all these poor savages, they had their land taken from them. No, we entered into relationships with these early settlers. And through that process, we were able to to find some type of similarities and build similarities and continue to build those relationships for things that work for us. A really good example of that is, so obviously the French were here for fur trade purposes. They hired the Native Americans, the Potawatomi amongst others, to go out, collect fur-bearing animals, bring them back, and then we would trade for those so that they could take those hides back to Europe. And so we would do that, and we would develop these relationships with the French. And in the French's perspective, that was it. That was the end of the interaction. But from a Potawatomi perspective, from a Anishinaabe perspective, the interaction doesn't end there. Once you establish a relationship with somebody, you need to maintain that relationship and show that you're doing good by that relationship. And the way that Indian people do that is we're constantly giving away. We're always giving. Potawatomi people, traditionally, we didn't judge how wealthy we were by how much we accumulated, but by how much we gave away. So when we would come and hang out with these French, and feast with them and eat with them and live with them, when they would come around, and they didn't bring any gifts, but we were, shoveling out gifts to them, and then they weren't doing the same. It's like, wait a minute, I thought we were friends. So eventually the French figured out, oh, if we're going to maintain this relationship, we got to give them something. Because it's not the monetary value of the gift, it's the social value of the gift. So eventually the French started doing something that they coined gift giving. And so they made sure that they always came with gifts in hand to not offend us, to not offend the Potawatomi, and make sure that those relationships were secure. Interestingly enough, when the British became more of a force in the area and the French kind of declined with their influence, right off the bat, the British didn't want to do gift giving because they didn't understand it like the French did at first. And that was one of the many reasons why Pontiac organized his rebellions. He wanted to get rid of the British and bring back the French as the prominent European people in the area, because they understood gift giving, they understood all these things, they understood how to interact with Potawatomi more so. Once the British figured that out, they obviously started doing gift giving as well, because if you have the locals on your side, you're going to be the most prominent power, and that was a very important thing when the American Revolution came to play. I think 7 generations ago, this river, the Ziba, was most definitely a lifeline for the communities that lived here, and it contributed to the balance and the health of those communities. And I see my Potawatomi ancestors having respect for that lifeline, having respect for the vitality that it provided the people. And as such, I know that my ancestors were making their offerings to this water, putting their tobacco in this water, and thanking this water, and thanking the Creator for this lifeline that we have. I think 7 generations ago, that's what I see would have been happening and taking place along this river. In Potawatomi worldview, we have to have a good relationship with all of creation. The plants, the animals, especially the water, the trees, everything that comes together to make creation. We need to have a good, positive relationship with that. Because as we understand it, what our teachings tell us is that all things that make up creation have a gift. The Creator put all of these things here, and we all have a gift for one another, and we all have a purpose for one another. And we need to respect and maintain that relationship in a good, healthy way. And our water is most definitely one of those resources that, as Potawatomi people, we're raised to respect and have good thoughts for that water, and make sure that we try to make good decisions to maintain the health and vibrancy of that water, because we know that our waterways, our rivers, our lakes, that's the lifeline of Mother Earth here, of Sagamokwe. When I talk about the relationships that we had with everything in creation, the relationships that we had with the river, it was a life source. We need that water to survive. that water to clean things. We need that water for, for a lot of different things that we do as human beings. And that's just the water itself, but then the life within the water, the fish, the different plants that grow in that water, the medicines that go around the shores and the banks of that water. We needed that as well. And then using the water for traveling purposes. So that's how we got from one side of the state to other, was getting off at this river, traveling a little bit to the next river and hopping on that river, and then keep on going down until we got to the next village. And so these rivers, these waterways play huge roles for us in large aspects of our life. I think there's two things that I always try to stress when I do presentations or when I do interviews. The first thing, from a historical perspective, that I always like to bring up is the fact that we weren't barbaric savages running around naked through the woods, and we just let the Europeans take our land. That's the furthest thing from the truth. We were involved in several conversations. The fact that the United States entered into treaties with our people says a lot about our diplomacy and our political nature and our savviness in both of those areas as well. So I really try to get away from this notion of these primitive hunter-gatherers that you hear about at museums, and try to get people to stop thinking of Native Americans that way historically. And in contemporary times, getting people to realize that there are still Native American people here. Growing up, I was told several times that I wasn't Native American because they were all dead. And it was like, it's always funny hearing that, like, no, you're not Indian. Like, yeah, I am. But getting people to realize that Native Americans are still here, and along with that, continuing to get away from this notion that Native Americans in primitive ways, why are they so synonymous? Native Americans exist right here, right now in 2020, and our culture has adapted and transformed with the times, just like American culture has. I mean, Americans don't ride in horse and buggy anymore, they ride in cars. And that's the exact same thing. So I'm not going to be living in a wigwam, I'm going to live in a house. Does that make me any less Potawatomi? Not one bit. What makes me Potawatomi is maintaining my identity, my language, my culture, my teachings, my values, my morals, and how I have a relationship, or try to have a relationship, with creation. That's what makes me Potawatomi. It's not wearing buckskin and living in a wigwam and having long hair, and I want to get people to try to separate that and think that Native Americans are stuck in this primitive image. So what I'm wearing is a medallion, and this is made out of porcupine quills. So these are porcupine quills that are wrapped around these bases here. And so these porcupine quills are dyed. A long time ago, they would have been dyed naturally. But our culture is not dead. Our culture is very much alive. And so we use whatever resources we have with us in contemporary times. So we use Rit dye to dye our quills. And I like to wear it if I'm doing presentations, or if I'm going to a ceremony or anything like that. And a common theme that you'll see in not just Potawatomi art, but indigenous art across the whole world is acknowledging the four cardinal directions. And so you'll see how that's acknowledged here, the four cardinal directions, and how those directions, they have different gifts that we believe. The north, the east, the south, the west, they all have different gifts to offer the people to learn from and grow from. It gets pretty deep. That's just surface level explanation. I work in the Department of Language and Culture for the Pokagon Band of Potawatomi Indians. And our mission, our purpose, the reason why Tribal Council established our department, was to ensure that our language and culture is maintained for the next 7 generations. We need to make sure that our Potawatomi way of life, our Potawatomi way of looking at the world, our Potawatomi values, morals, all those things, we need to make sure that they stay intact, and that we need to maintain them. Because without our language and culture, we have no right to call ourselves Potawatomi. We cease to exist as being Potawatomi. Without our language and culture, there's absolutely nothing that distinguishes us between the rest of America. So that's what's really important about our identity and our sovereignty, is our language and our culture. So that's our mission. And we're there as a resource for our community. If we have families that aren't very knowledgeable of language and culture, and so we try to have those resources, and we also act as a resource for our partner communities, our neighbors, that want to learn more about Native American people and help educate their families and their communities about who we are.